So have you ever thought about being an online teacher? Making the switch from brick and mortar schools to fully online? With everything that happened last year, I'm sure it's crossed more minds than usual. So today I'm going to go through some questions you might ask yourself if you're considering that transition. Let's go. So first question you might ask, do you have Wi-Fi? Do you have good Wi-Fi in your area? So your school, if you transition to an online school, is most likely going to send you a laptop, just like any other normal school would. But you will need to have Wi-Fi in your house or workplace, residence, so that you can actually do the things you need to do. So if that's not something you have, be prepared to have that expense added. In a similar vein, how good are you with computers? Do you frequently need to ask somebody for help with even the basic word processing tasks? Or do you often kind of use Excel? Do you navigate several websites? Can you manage a learning management system? Can you manage a student information system? Can you log contacts with families, with students? Are you comfortable moving around in those pages? You are going to be on your own for the most part. So your school, wherever you go, will likely have a tech department. You will likely have a team of people you can ask simple questions of, but it is a lot of on your own kind of figuring it out. Is that something you're good at, or is that something you really struggle with? Something that would be good to know if you're considering that transition. I had to fix that angle a little bit. I was feeling too high. But the next question you might want to ask yourself, did you like teaching online when we were all required to do so? If you didn't like it then, you're probably not going to like it now. I will stipulate that there's a difference between brick and mortar that is forced to convert online and a school that is already designed for online. It's a big difference in curriculum and how that curriculum is given to students. So like in a brick and mortar, you have a textbook because kids are showing up so they can have a physical book. In online, they inherently won't do that because they're not going to see them. So the text is all online. All the activities are already made for an online format. So they're like digital multiple choice versus worksheets that you probably have 1,000 copies of in your classroom. So that being said, there's not quite so many hurdles as opposed to what we were doing last year, where you had to suddenly convert everything from physical to digital. Everything's pretty much already going to be digital if you're at a dedicated online school. Did you like Zoom? Because you're going to be doing a lot of it if you're in an online school. And granted, they might use a different platform. They might use Google Meet. They might use Teams. They might use WebEx, which I think is Apple's version. They're all about the same. You still have to manage the video screens, the participants, the chat, whatever it's called on that specific program. Is that something you could do? Is that something that you've found a system that works for you? Or is it still constantly a struggle? In online school, you're going to have all digital meetings. So there's going to be a lot of video software. Are you going to be able to handle that? Or is that something that you can't do? Right now, according to my Google Calendar, I spend about 6 to 7 hours a week in meetings, which I feel is vastly different from when I was teaching from a brick and mortar but online. Like I feel like I probably spent 8 hours a day on Zoom. I was just constantly in meetings all day long. And I could manage that, and because I had so many hours doing it, I feel like I got really good at Zoom, but I don't miss being on camera 8 hours a day. Like, that's a lot of time. So keep that in mind too. And granted, you might teach more often than I currently do. I only teach one class a day, 4 days a week. And then Friday is just kind of like small groups meeting with specific children, students that I have to meet with, parents, if that happens. You might have to teach more often than that. So maybe you're teaching 2 or 3 classes a day, 4 classes a day. But it was a lot less than my brick and mortar that converted to online temporarily. Another question might be, did you like converting your paper resources to digital? So when we were all teaching from home last year, I had to convert a ton of worksheets that I had into Google Docs. And instead of having lines for students to physically write on, I would have empty text boxes for them to type in, and they would just get bigger if students needed more room. So it's small things like that that would be involved in me changing resources. Maybe it was a lab that we can't do the physical version of because we're not in school and there's not like tiles to count. But I can switch it to maybe a surveys sort of lab where they can build a million Google Forms and share them out with their classmates. Like I kind of touched on earlier, being in a dedicated online school, every resource is digital. There are like no physical resources because we only interact with students online. So everything's kind of already designed to be filled out on a computer versus by hand. And there are the occasional students with accommodations, IEPs, 504s, whichever, that you will make paper resources for that they're going to print out and write on. But those kids are by no means the majority, and most of that is easy enough to convert for the few students that do require it. Not to mention most of it, because it's a dedicated online school, is multiple choice questions, which don't really need to be converted in any sense. We can provide like a PDF version for students to print and like mark up, but that doesn't really take time either. Where I'm really growing with this point is, as I've been online, we've been asked for projects or things that relate to our curriculum, and I've been able to pull a lot of resources from brick-and-mortar and transfer them to the new school. But I had to go through the process of making them digital if they were full physical resources. So that's going to be something you're going to deal with as you transition from brick-and-mortar to digital, converting some of those resources. If you don't like doing that, that might be a challenge because it's definitely going to come up. So next question would be, are you good at building relationships? It's different in brick and mortar and online. So in brick and mortar, you see your kids, you can smile and joke with them in homeroom, you can joke with them during class, get to know them during, independent work time, kind of circle around, figure things out about children. And just being there, offering them that warm support, it can do a lot. In online school, you're not really doing that as much because there's not any of that kind of, not junk time, but like non-educational time. Because like you're pretty much just on the meeting for class and then you're done and that's it. There's not like a homeroom that I run. We have other staff members who cover homeroom who are not specifically teachers. And that makes it kind of hard to get to know the kids sometimes because all you have is the chat. Our kids are not required to turn on their cameras or even come off mute, but we do ask that they use the chat if they are there. So that's kind of the only way I can get to know my kids in class. However, something I do like is I can book one-on-one meetings with students pretty much any time throughout normal school hours. And I can meet with them one-on-one. I can talk with them specifically about what their interests outside of school are. I can conference with them on their grade quickly. We can talk about things they're struggling with. And it's just the two of us. There's no other students to overhear. There's nobody seeing that I'm pulling aside child A again. So it's all very private in that sense. And the only real kind of distractions are just anything that's going on in the background of the student, which most of the time is minimal. So that's really nice. I can pull kids for one-on-ones a lot more easily, and I can pull random small groups a lot more easily. But the actual non-educational time that we have during the normal brick and mortar school day doesn't really exist. So it's 6 in one, half dozen in the other. But you have to be comfortable with calling kids on the phone or doing those one-on-one meetings to really get to know your students. That leads into the next one. Are you comfortable calling kids? Because you're going to do it a lot. Being on an online school, we really do have, my particular school has a focus on student accountability, which I love. So we are required to conference with a certain number of students every month, which is great. And in brick and mortar, I feel like I was required to talk to so many parents every month, which they're not the ones in my classroom. But with online schooling, I'm required to talk to so many students in a month and really make sure I'm connecting with those students, that I'm checking in with them about their grades and making sure that I'm providing them the resources they need to be successful. So I like that part of it, but it was definitely something to get used to. I don't like talking on the phone. I really, really don't like it. It's so awkward, I think, to call a kid, especially kids who like don't talk on the phone anymore. Like they exclusively text, Snapchat, Instagram Messenger, like it's all chat. But that's what's required. And the more you do it, the easier it is. And honestly, it's not nearly as weird now as it used to be. And I've gotten over a lot of it just because I've had to do it so often. But if that's like a big anxiety thing for you, this might not be the spot because you're going to do it a lot. Do you struggle with classroom management, and do you honestly just dislike classroom management? So classroom management was one of the biggest things that I fought to get better at when I was in brick and mortar. I was constantly trying to find the right system, the right something that I can enforce that would mean something to students, to make sure that everybody could stay in their seat, be moderately quiet while I was giving instruction, and still get all of their work done. And there was just, it was a lot of work. There's a lot of work, especially because my students were so all over the place in grade level, so that would change work level. And then family support has a lot to do with it. So how much were families invested in their students' education? If their parents didn't care whether they got an A or an F, they were less likely to care, and it showed. They were there for their friends, not the education. And that's probably every school, but it was very difficult to wrangle 30 students into sitting in a chair, listening to the things I had to say, and then getting them started on an activity, or even getting them to complete 3 questions in 10 minutes. Some kids could do it in 2 minutes. Other kids needed 20 minutes of like hand holding. And that's just, it's hard. But with online learning, I don't really have to worry about them talking to each other, because who are they going to talk to? The only way to talk is in the public chat. And if it gets too much, I can just change the chat to private so they can only talk to me. And that problem is solved. They're not going to get out of their seat and just throw something out and just like disrupt the whole class because the camera's off. Nobody's even going to know if they get up. I don't even know technically if they're there, which is not ideal. But all of the like classroom problems, the electric pencil sharpener, it's not a thing in online because they're constantly on mute. So almost all classroom management things just kind of go out the window when you're online. The major thing that happens is just monitoring the chat to make sure it's a positive, supportive community, which I'll take it. I'll take it. I can manage that. We can create positive expectations around the chat, and we can withhold them as a community. Totally fine doing that. But all of the little nudgy things that happen in brick and mortar, admin coming in, a dean coming in to grab a student, they don't happen because there's only 40 minutes of instructional time. That's it. And it's so much nicer in that sense. Also, if students are struggling, they can reach out to me privately in the chat and be like, what are we doing? What is happening? What is this word? And they don't have to feel publicly embarrassed because it's all private. So I like that part of it, and the way I can individually reach each student and the amount of privacy it kind of allows each student. Another one, do you hate commuting? Is it not conducive to your family schedule? Right? I mean, who really likes to drive like an hour each way to go to work? I'm not sure there's many people. Unless maybe you're driving, next to the ocean and there's no traffic. And then it might be a lovely drive. But commuting is not fun. Working in an online school, I get to work from my home office. My commute is 30 seconds from my bedroom down to my office. You can go ahead and check out my video from last week, which is a day in the life of an online teacher, to see how long my commute is and kind of the other general gist of what I do in a day. But that's definitely the biggest thing, especially because I was driving almost 2.5 hours every day to and from work before. I get so much of my life back being a work from home teacher. The other thing is, what I'm noticing is a lot of the other teachers I work with, they're either young, so they like the tech and they're like starting a family, or they're older teachers with like 4 or 5 kids. And if you have that many kids, or if you want to have that many kids, getting them to all of their things, getting them to school, their extracurricular activities, it's got to be so much more convenient to be at home so you can just pick them up and drop them off from home rather than having to drive a half hour each way from work or an hour each way. Like, you couldn't do it. Plus, then you would need before and after school care. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of extra balls kind of in the air if you're adding in that commute. So something else to consider if you want a big family, if you have a big family, if you're just very involved in other things outside of school and you need more of your time back. Do you like the uninterrupted one-on-one time with students? So I mentioned this, I think, a couple questions ago, how I can just make one-on-one meetings with students and there's pretty much no interruption. I can have 10 dedicated minutes to talk to this student about their likes and interests and where their struggles are with school, because there's nothing else for them or me to get distracted by. There's not 29 other kids in the room that I kind of have to secretly watch while I talk to my one kid and I can't really focus on them, because I know I have 3 students who will get off task and just kind of popcorn everybody else, you know? So having that one-on-one uninterrupted time is wonderful. Even for those kids in the middle who often get lost, or those upper kids who really just need that extra push to make sure they're like really kind of pushing their thinking. That's something else I would say for online charter, or just like an online teaching position. I'm able to give more attention to those higher students because I'm not constantly dealing with behaviors of lower students or trying to catch them up. I'm still able to give them that attention to make sure that they're moving and they're progressing so they get back to as close to on track as I can get them. But I'm also able to focus on those top tier students because I have the time, because I can pull them for one-on-ones. I can modify individual assignments for them so that instead of a 5-paragraph essay, I have to have them include 3 cited sources in that 5-paragraph essay, which, you know, just a little tiny thing that really does help keep them moving and not have them bored in my class. If you watched last week's video about my day in my life, you'll notice I was alone most of the time. If you don't like being alone most of your day, online teaching might not be for you. Sure, you have class throughout the day and you're going to have one-on-one meetings with kids and you're going to have meetings with your team, either school-wide, grade level, content area. You'll have those meetings, but they're only about 7 hours of my week. Most of the time, it's just me in my home office doing whatever I have to do. Lesson planning, activities, slides, grading. There's not a lot of connection with other people. And like, I will talk to other teachers in my school and we will discuss things of relevance, but it's not quite the same. It's harder to build relationships in this kind of environment because you don't see each other all the time. You don't have the consistent struggles with students or with admin or behaviors or just seeing each other in the hallway. There's no like prep periods that you specifically line up and talk to each other at. It's a whole different ball game. And it's definitely something I missed from my brick and mortar. Like, I'm still really close with a lot of my teacher friends from my old school, and I don't feel like I've made friendships of that sort at the new school yet. And part of that might just be because I'm newer. I definitely didn't have my teacher friends this early into my last school either. They were definitely a later addition once I like stopped panicking all the time. But part of it, I think, is also just like the online environment isn't super conducive to it because you're not constantly with people. You're not constantly needing to vent or just like conference and share because you have meetings for that, and it's not quite the same. most important question, and actually a question I got asked in my interview: how are you with managing your own time? Can you avoid distractions? So in my interview, they asked me how I was with time management. They asked me, how I am with managing my own time. Can I get tasks done? And I talked all about how sometimes I will put my phone in a different room just so I can make sure I get these grading things done. And a lot of that is going to come down to self-discipline and setting a schedule for yourself. So because you're at home, you could work 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. if you wanted. I don't know why you would want to do that, but you could, because it's not like the building closes and the janitors ask you to leave. But you're going to be on your own for most of the time. You have work that needs to be done, certain numbers of conferences, grading, meetings with students, families. You have to be able to manage your time, because in a traditional brick and mortar school, most of your day is kind of laid out. You have your 6 or 5 classes you teach throughout the day. You have a scheduled prep, you have a scheduled lunch. You might have lunch duty, you might have recess duty, you might have bus duty on a rotating schedule. You might have PLCs or meetings on a regular schedule, but pretty much every minute of your day is planned out for the most part. In the online school, it's really not that way. I have my morning class, I have my lunch on my calendar, and then I might have a random meeting or two throughout the day, but most of the time I have uninterrupted blocks of time that I just decide what I'm going to do that day. So maybe Mondays I do my slides, maybe I catch up on grades in the morning and then I focus on prep work in the afternoon, whatever it is. But I have to be really disciplined and make sure I get my things done, and I'm not constantly scrolling on Facebook, YouTube, whatever, so that I can get my things done. All of these questions are definitely things you're going to want to think about if you're considering that transition from brick and mortar to an online school. That being said, I really do like being online. I loved the people I worked with in brick and mortar, and I liked working with the students in that way. I think I learned a lot of good things from the brick and mortar school that I was at, but the sheer convenience of not having to commute is wonderful. And I like working with the technology. I like problem solving those things. I like converting my physical resources to digital as I've needed to. And I have several videos on things I've done with this. Check out some of my Google playlist videos here for some of my favorite tips in those programs, which I still use all the time. But overall, this has been a really positive transition for me. I feel like I'm given more time to teach and actually work with my students versus just kind of deal with the paperwork and the bureaucracy of it all. Because I only teach once a day, I'm not repeating myself in 5 of the same class. So I only teach once, which kind of condenses that time, so then I can focus on the other things, like the conferencing, like meetings with students on a one-on-one basis, small groups if that's something that I can do that week. So I've really enjoyed this kind of time. If you have any other questions about being an online teacher, go ahead and drop them in the comments section, and I will try to answer them as best as I can. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Please give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it and it helped you, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.